Good Dr. Locklear, Part 2. He jumped at the sound of the holding cell door beginning to creak open. Whatever fuss the patient next door had been making hadn't lasted long enough. He wasn't ready. Damn whoever caused the stir and gave him a false sense of security. But he had no choice but to go with the plan. Tonight was the night. It had to happen tonight or it wouldn't happen at all. The normal night nurse, Gertrude, was an ox of a woman. Even if he weren't still slightly sedated, or in any restraints at all, he knew better than to try his luck against her. She would make quick work of him, snapping him in two like a twig. However, tonight was different. For the past month, every third Friday, a sweet young woman named Emily would shadow Gertrude, training to become a fully fledged night nurse herself. It just so happened that tonight was her very first night on the job, all by herself. She was the only one on patrol on both floors 3 and 4. That is, unless you count Ernie, the security guard, if you can even call him that. He was a heavy man, to say the least, and had grown a little too accustomed to letting Gertrude take care of all the muscle work. He wouldn't be a challenge in the slightest. How fortunate for him that his good behavior had gotten him moved to such a low-risk ward. Poor, sweet Emily was a lovely young thing. Slender, elegant frame, soft skin that looked as though it could be made of porcelain. Not to mention her lovely auburn curls. Why, had fate not been so cruel, and circumstances been different, he figured he very much may have fancied her. But fate hadn't been kind, and these were the circumstances. And though they would never be together, she would be his savior. Her delicate frame and lack of experience would pave the way to his escape. For that, he would make sure she wouldn't suffer. As quickly as he could, he dove for the crevice in the wall. He clutched onto the scalpel with his teeth, and once again slid it down the front of his collar. He hurriedly shoved the square of padding back into place, and with barely enough time, he rolled over onto his stomach and lied still, as if the sedatives were still active, and began pathetically moaning. Not a second later, and Emily had made her way into his cell. Sympathetically, she reached down and put a comforting hand on his back. "What's the matter, dear?" she said in a sweet voice. He nearly reconsidered the whole plot right then and there. But her innocence would not be enough to save her. My arms! I can't feel them!" he wailed. "Oh dear! What medications are you on? Let me get my chart." "No!" he gasped. "No, please, I beg of you. Just look at them. They burn like fire, and I can't move them." She frowned for a moment, but he just laid face down on the floor, howling in agony. Her heart ached for him, and after a moment's hesitation, she began to undo the straps. He lay there whimpering, not moving a muscle. She knew better than this, but this was Dr. Harrison's star patient. If she could afford to bend the rules for anyone, it would be this man, whom during her entire time working at the sanatorium was so well behaved, he never gave any trouble, so gentle that he wouldn't dream to even hurt a fly. And who knows, perhaps the treatment really was working and this man was nearly cured. It would be just inhumane to stand here and watch him writhe in agony. His breathing slowed as the last buckles were undone. He gave a slight shiver as Emily heaved with all her might to sit him upright once more, where she began to examine his wrists. She went slowly up and down, pressing into different points, asking whether it hurt more or less. He sat there quietly and well-behaved, until she released his arms. She scratched her head in confusion as she tried to figure out the cause of his mysterious ailment. Finally, she gave a sigh and said, "I'm just not sure what could be causing this. I'll have to go get that chart. Perhaps it's a reaction to a new medication." Just as she turned her head to the door, he slipped his hand down the collar of the straitjacket. His arms were still in the pointy little sleeves, but he was able to get a firm grip upon the handle. He popped the lid off with his teeth, and then, faster than the poor girl could glance back at him, he had pounced. He held her crushingly tight with his left arm and pulled her close. She struggled with all her might, but still his grip did not break. Her screams echoed in vain, as the closest help was 2 floors away. He tried to hush her, whispering gently in her ear, "Hush now, love, you won't feel a thing." And with one swift motion, he brought the scalpel slicing deeply from one ear to the next, severing her carotid artery, turning her panicked screams into gurgling whimpers until they faded away completely. He held her limp body in his arms for a moment. "What a waste," he thought to himself somberly. He held her until his straitjacket was entirely saturated in her warm, sticky blood. He then set her down ever so gently before removing his restraint. After freeing his arms, he gingerly plucked the card key from the front pocket of her scrubs. This would be most useful. He looked down at his own blood-soaked flesh and reflected for a moment. He would need to find some new clothing on his way out. Perhaps he would find some in the storage unit in the basement where his personal effects were being held. Giving Emily's corpse one final glance, he exited the cell, closing and locking the door, so as not to alarm Ernie should he actually make it down to this floor. With great haste, he sprinted down the hallway, careful not to make too much noise. When he reached the enormous door at the end of the corridor, he pulled out the card key and swiped it through the reader. He waited for a moment. Then there was an audible click. He gently pushed, and the door popped freely open. Now he would have to be more on his guard. In this portion of the hospital, there were far more nurses on duty. He sprinted down the hallway until he saw what he was looking for. An elevator. Praising his good luck, he pressed the button, excitedly waiting for the elevator to whisk him to freedom. However, he celebrated too soon. Just then, he heard talking. 2 voices right around the corner. He threw himself away from the elevator and wedged himself between the nearby vending machine and the wall. The 2 nurses did not see him and kept talking as they came to a stop in front of the elevator. However, they went silent as one of them reached for the button, seeing it was already lit. They glanced up and down the hallway, but before they could say anything, the elevator let out a ding as it arrived on their floor. They simply shrugged and said, "We have got to get the maintenance guy to look at this old thing. I'm surprised it's still operating," as they boarded. He let out a sigh of relief as the elevator doors came to a close, though now he had to find a different way down. He pried himself out of his hiding place and peered around the corner. Fortunately, the stairs were straight ahead. He made a dash for the door before any more nurses had a chance to make their way through the busy hallway. He soon tucked out of sight, into the drafty stairway. It was dim, and the lights flickered ominously. He thought for a moment that it built quite the frightening atmosphere, but then chuckled, because, he supposed, he was the monster lurking in this dark place. His footsteps echoed lightly as he made his way down. 2, 1, and then basement. Just what he needed. He pulled out his card key once more and swiped it to gain entrance to the door. It cracked open a little more stubbornly than the last door. He cautiously pushed through, just enough to peek in. There wasn't a soul to be seen, so he merrily made his way down the corridor. He glanced at the laminated map on the floor plan that someone had stapled to the wall. The storage room in which the personal effects of patients 300 to 399 were kept just a little farther ahead. With a quickened pace, he soon found the room. Once more, he pulled out his trusty card key. He swiped it, waiting eagerly for the door to pop open. But something was wrong. There was no click, and the door stood just as stubbornly firm as before. He began to panic. He hadn't accounted for this. He would have to find another key, kill another nurse, and spend even more of his precious dwindling time. In a wave of frustration, he violently swept the card key once more. To his immense relief, this time, he was met by the welcome click of the lock. He quickly pushed the door open and slipped inside. It was a fairly large room, filled with locker after locker from floor to ceiling. He looked about, trying to find a map of the room so as to pinpoint the location of his locker. He then noticed a desk on the opposite wall. It was cluttered with some old files and what looked to be an old computer. But there was also something else. A thick, old journal. Despite the fleeting time, his curiosity overcame him and he moved in to pick it up. He thumbed to the middle and found it to be notes about another patient, number 355. He knew that guy. He was there when he was first brought in. Intrigued, he flipped through the pages until he came across Patient 399. He leaned in a bit closer to attempt to read the chicken scratch the author had left there. Terrible handwriting seemed to be a common trait among all doctors. He froze upon what he read. It couldn't be true. There was no way. He tossed the journal to the side and began digging through the old folders until he found his own. As he opened it, photographs came spilling out onto the desk in front of him. His eyes widened at the horrors that lay before him. So many bodies, neatly lined upon gurneys, yet so thoughtlessly mutilated. Torsos ripped open with rotten entrails leaking out, bloated and sour with decay. All missing body parts. Some had clearly had their eyes torn out, with nothing but hollow, decaying sockets in their place. Others were missing important internal organs. It was a baffling sight. All the missing organs had clearly been removed with delicate care, yet the rest of their bodies were violently mutilated, as if in a fit of immense rage. There was photo after photo of these horrors. In disgust, he threw them onto the floor and then snatched what appeared to be a copy of an old police report. He then began reading it with shaking hands. As he read, his mind was flooded with memories. The report read, "On the morning of Saturday the 3rd of February, the suspect, Dr. Evander Locklear, was apprehended from within a patient's home. The night before, detectives discovered the horrors that lied in the secret workshop that lied directly below his clinic. It is believed that he is responsible for the grotesque experiments, mutilations, and murders of an estimated 30 to 40 individuals. We believe that the doctor was abducting individuals and was keeping them hostage in his underground chamber, where he later performed his gruesome operations. It appears that he was holding them with the intent to harvest their vital organs. Over the course of 2 years, he treated approximately 20 patients in which he transplanted the stolen organs into. One said case is of minor Anna, last name excluded, whom received a lung transplant. Upon further testing, it was determined that the lungs she received had previously belonged to Paul Kenneth, a recently released sex offender. Kenneth went missing from his home January 15th, 3 days after he was acquitted of the charges held against him. His body was discovered in the underground chamber Saturday the 3rd. His lungs had been removed from his body. Autopsy results showed that they had been removed while he was still alive. He stopped reading and set down the report as he began to remember. That's right, he stuttered to himself. My work. My good work. He had been the savior of the good and the innocent, those who were refused treatment and sentenced to death merely because they were too poor to afford proper treatment. Because of him, they could live. The trade-off was minor. In fact, it was good work within itself. All those filthy criminals who had done nothing but harm and defile others, those bastards who got away scot-free simply because of a hiccup in the court system. Why should they get to live, while sweet little Anna should die, slowly drowning to death in her own bodily fluids? It's just wrong. I became a righter of wrongs. I saved the lives of countless people, and I gave those filthy criminals the first opportunity to do something good in their entire lives. Perhaps by sacrificing their own lives to save the innocents, God will have mercy on their souls. But my work is not done. Oh, far from it. The cities get more and more evil each day, filling with corrupt and wicked people, while the good die young. I'll need to work in double speed now. And this time, I won't be stopped. From there, he slowly wound his way back through the lockers. He stopped in front of locker 399 and popped it open. From within, he found the clothes that he had been arrested in. A long, dark burgundy hooded cloak, and a savage-looking plague doctor's mask, crusted in dried blood. He quickly slipped them on, and without so much as a glance, he left the storage room, and went out through the emergency exit. This set the alarm into wailing, but it was of little concern to him now. He slipped out into the cold, crisp air, and vanished into the night. He had much work to do.